this is what I'm making. See this scarf?
Mm-hmm.
See that one?
Mm-hmm.
See that one?
Mm-hmm.
Which one's your favorite?
That one.
Look, see all the FAUX pictures? See? Aren't they fun? So that's what this is for. That's what we're gonna make. Okay? So should we tell everybody about it?
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. Hi guys. Welcome to the DIY Designer. If you're new here, I'm Orly. And if you're not new here, you know me, but you might not know Blake. I don't know if you've met Blake. This is my daughter. Hi. My little smush. Hi. She loves when I make things, and she's home right now because we're shooting on a Saturday, which is very unusual. And so she's here with me, so I figured I'd let her be a part of this. Do you know the brand Ashish? I really hope I'm saying it right, but they posted a photo from their most recent runway collection, and there was this faux fur, like really long scarf, and it was like little patches of really bright colors, almost like a rainbow color faux fur scarf. And I just thought, it's so easy to make and it's so cool, and I love faux fur. I just think it gives that luxe quality, but obviously it's not real, which is super fun and super inexpensive. We're gonna make two today. One is gonna be like the Ashish one, which is just long, straight, kind of like a super skinny rectangle. Make it however long you want. The other is gonna be that kind that has the slit on one side where it's open, you wrap it around and then like tuck the one side into the slit so it becomes like a little crisscross situation. What I did is I went downtown. There's this one store that has a ton of faux fur. Bright colors, neon colors, stripes, long pile, short pile. All different options. And I found this one right here. Really neutral. The colors are actually really neutral and they'll go with anything. And I think they add a pop, but not too much of a pop. Materials. So the first thing that you're gonna do is lay your fabric flat on the floor, and what I found was easiest was to actually just fold over however big I wanted the scarf. So what I'm looking at right now, the fur side, that's how wide my scarf will end up being. So just fold it, kind of make sure that everything looks straight. Once you get the look that you want, grab chalk, I couldn't find any so I'm using a crayon, and just create a straight line down the side so that we can cut it. Now, you're gonna use an Exacto knife to cut this, and there are a couple of reasons why. The main reason is that you only wanna cut the fabric part of the fur and not the fur. If you just cut the fabric that is holding the fur together, then not only do you end up with no like cropped edges where all of a sudden the long fur has this blunt edge, but you also have no cleanup. If you're using a scissor, you're gonna end up with all these tiny little furs all over the place. Filming at home is not easy when everyone is home, by the way. All right, so I've just cut the whole thing down the side and I moved that piece off. Now, because I'm gonna be making that second version with the slit, I want that one to be a little bit smaller all around. So I folded it over about 2 inches, like more narrow than the first one, but otherwise the exact same process. I did try doing it where I just cut while it was folded and not use a crayon, and I don't recommend it. Now my piece is ready and I'm just evening off my edges. Sometimes when they cut fabric for you at the fabric store, they just cut like a yard, they don't cut it straight. So always lay it down and make sure it's straight. Each faux fur has all fur has a direction, right? You want the fur to be going down. So for example, if I just took this whole piece, sewed it together, this side is going down the way I want it to, but this side is going up, which we don't want. We want both ends to be pointing down because it also gives us that really pretty like soft edge to it. So what we're gonna do is cut it in half and sew it back together so that there's a seam in the center back and both angles point downward. So to create that look, what you wanna do is fold your fabric in half, not lengthwise, but fold it in half this way. I just put my ruler in, that way when I open it, I have a ruler in the right spot. Draw a line and now cut it. So now my scarf is in half. You can see there is the nice long fringy edge that's pointing down. So you're just going to rotate it, flip it, and now sew this together. So now the right and the left side are both pointing downward. So you can see I've pinned them together and I'm just hand sewing it together. If you want to use a sewing machine here, you absolutely can, but you want to mimic these stitches. So you want to do it on a very loose stitch. You don't want a tight stitch on this. Once you get to the end, just take extra time to make sure that you do make it tight on those ends, but the center, do a loose stitch. Now you can see when I take out my pins and open it, both of my furs are pointing the opposite direction basically. They're each going away from each other. I'm using my fingers to pull out any of the long fur that actually got tucked into the seam. That way it helps hide the seam. Now it's time to really sew our scarf together. So fold it in half lengthwise, making sure that it's face to face. So obviously the fur is facing the inside. I realized on one end it was a little uneven, so I just went in there, evened it up, and I was good to go. So now again, I'm going to be using a needle and thread for this. You start off with a nice tight stitch on your very end, and then you're going to do like multiple stitches at once. So you go in, out, in, out, in, out. That's maybe 3 or 4 stitches. Now grab your needle and pull. Again, in, out, in, out, in, out, pull. So basically you're doing about 4 or 5 stitches at a time, as many as you can do on the length of your needle. If you are using a sewing machine, make sure to do it like, maybe it's not quite a basting stitch, but as wide a stitch as you possibly can get. And you'll see why that's important in just a second. Now, make sure to take time to remove any pins because once you flip it inside out and sew it, you're kind of screwed. So take your hand and put it inside the scarf all the way, keep pulling it in until you get to the end. Now grab the end, found an extra pin, and you're basically gonna do what you do when you're making a belt or a spaghetti strap. You're just going to pull the inside all the way through until it flips the whole thing inside out. So here is the majority of the work done, basically. You can see both of my furs are pointing downward, which is what I want, and the seam is hidden in the back, and you can really barely see it even as it is. Now, this is an important step that you don't want to skip. You want to grab with your fingers, pull any of the threads that got stuck inside of the seam, and that's why a loose stitch is really important. If it was a super tight stitch, you wouldn't be able to pull them out, and you would see all of them kind of tucked into the seam, which you do not want. Now that I've done that, I want to sew it closed. You want to decide where you want your seam. For me, I decided I wanted that seam in the center back so that from the front, you wouldn't see any seam anywhere. So you want to lay it flat and just start sewing it closed. I really recommend hand sewing this, even if you've been using a machine for the rest. You just want to create little tacks in the bottom of it, and if you notice that the fur is getting tacked down, use your fingers to pull it out so it hides the stitch. You're just going to do that all the way across. And now let's move on to the one with the slit. You're gonna make it exactly the same. You're going to cut your piece, you're going to cut it in half and sew it together so both sides face the right direction with the fur, and then you're gonna sew up your side. The only change here is that you wanna mark an opening. I marked mine from here to here. This is where the opening for the slit is gonna be. So I sewed it closed all the way down, then I stopped, get myself a big gap and sewed it back closed. That's the first step. This is also a little bit shorter than my other one. So when I cut it here, I just cut off about 4 inches on either side so that the whole thing would become a little bit shorter. It inside out, and here is the opening. So now, because I want my center seam hidden down the middle, which is gonna be hidden in the back, this section I need to cut open out of this fabric. That way, when it's flipped, there's an opening going all the way from the back through the front. So now I'm doing this with one hand, so I'm not gonna show you guys, unless, Connor, can you film this?
I don't know what to do.
Come here. See where I am? So right here, from the opening, I'm going to cut open the back so that now it's open on both sides. You can see there's our little slit. So basically this one-handed is not easy. Okay, so you can see it goes through. And now you just end up with that little crisscross thing. All right, so that's it. I gotta say, it's pretty satisfying because the fur is so forgiving. The long pile, which is the length of the fur, really hides anything. So your seams, that's one reason it's really great to hand sew or to just do a loose stitch so that you can then go in and pull those threads out. If you do a really small stitch, they're all gonna get curled in, which you don't want. So if you do use a sewing machine, no problem. Just make sure you do it on a sort of like a larger stitch so that you can get in there, pull all those threads out. Obviously making sure that they both angle downwards is a huge must. Do not skip that. It's gonna make all the difference in the world. And then the only real difference between the long one and the shorter one is basically the length, number one, but then just creating that slit in the one side so that it can tuck in. Otherwise, it's really like the same exact thing. So this is so fun. I hope that you guys liked this one. If you did, please subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Share it with a friend. Tag me on social if you share it there. I always appreciate it so much. Your guys' support means everything to me. So I'm going to go outside and, you know, do the weirdness. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
I got legs for days, don't stop me. Make up a reason to abandon me, please. All you gotta do is play right. Keep to the left. No stress. I'm worth the while. Change into a passive voice and run me down, down. Run me down. Make beliefs not for me, stay raw. I need much more substance for it to make sense. Crush crystals, lose decimals. Reinvent your every sentence, and all you gotta do is play right. Keep to the left. No stress. I'm worth the while. Change into a passive voice and run me down, down. Run me down. You don't need to carry his weight. Give him the